Welcome to today's Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to share this one with you. We're jumping right into a stunningly grimdark fable today, a story where strict mechanical determinism violently collides with organic free will. We're going to unpack this whole narrative using a Fichtean dialectic, which basically means we're looking at a thesis, an antithesis, and a final, completely shattering synthesis.
Let's start right off the bat with this incredible hook from the text. It reads, "The absolute ice carries a single warm fracture, and the hand you chose to touch has already begun to rewrite the escapement you thought finished." I mean, wow. That single sentence masterfully sets the stage for a massive cosmic dispute between two profoundly different entities, and it's a dispute that literally threatens to shatter the reality of their entire universe.
Okay, so part one, the thesis, the absolute ice. To really grasp this conflict, we've got to map out the worldview of our mechanical god, Sir Brain. His whole state of being is what he proudly calls the absolute ice. He sees himself as this self-willed flame that's completely shed the heavy pack of old Victorian morality. But the catch is, in doing so, he's locked himself in what the text describes as the sixth solitude of a global cage. Sir Brain actually looks at the ancient parables of the Geneva clock tower not as cautionary warnings about the limits of control, but as outright confirmations of his own sovereign will. In his mind, the simple swing of a pendulum is proof that time itself has been made to kneel before him.
And this brings us to the tragic irony of his existence, this sublime prison. His extreme isolation creates a mechanical tyranny that is, quite frankly, completely paralyzed by the deep fear of ever stopping. Alara, his counterpart, observes all this and realizes that his so-called sovereign majesty is really just the tantrum of a machine. It's a machine that's way too terrified to be wound by any hand but its own. It's literally a prison built of unyielding gears.
Just listen to this excerpt from his diatribe. He's actively scoffing at Alara here. He declares, "You dare to lecture me on the noble nature of the crack, mirror of reason? You who still carry the old wound of nostalgia for empty benches and ordinary human heat as if it were a virtue? My dark fire is not a domestic hearth. It is a sovereign flame that has burned the very right to turn into the metal of this world, creating a sublime prison where nothing is permitted to drift and nothing is allowed to dream." The sheer theatricality there is wild, right? You can hear his absolute refusal to allow for any warmth, any deviation, or any organic dreaming in his metallic domain.
Moving into part two, the antithesis, the sovereign artisan.
So on the flip side, we have a much warmer, more flexible force, Alara. Her journey transforms her from just a mere observer into a true sovereign artisan. And she does this by integrating her shadow archetype, which is known as the mirror of reason. This is basically her cynical side that actually tasted sovereignty and, crucially, chose not to spit it out. By accepting this shadow, she manages to transform her purely organic, honest pulse into a calculating engine of the soul. She basically becomes a master horologist of her own spirit, fully equipped to challenge the mechanical god.
Now, you can probably guess that these two philosophies stand in stark contrast to one another. On one hand, we've got Sir Brain's rigid absolute ice, a system demanding absolute perfection that literally cannot bend. On the other hand, Alara embraces what she calls the soft error. Instead of trying to fight the machine with another rigid machine, she introduces a deliberate soft error into her own will. This flexibility is brilliant because it prevents the mechanical plague from taking her over. She yields to her own complexity rather than locking herself in a prison of unyielding gears.
We also see this contrast play out in how they both use the motif of the dark fire. For Sir Brain, the dark fire is just a sovereign flame used to forge a global cage. It's purely a tool of dominance. But for Alara, she stops viewing the dark fire as some foreign contamination. Instead, she uses it as necessary heat. She uses that warmth to map the groaning seams of her own spirit with absolute precision. She's using the fire to understand herself, not to imprison everyone else.
And all of this leads to Alara's fierce retort, known as the refusal of the sovereign artisan. She tells him straight up, "Then keep your tower and your mechanical plague, for I hear the lonely sound of your heart and I know it for what it is, a mechanical error that no calibration can fix." Notice how she cleverly uses his own mechanical terminology right back at him? She's exposing the fact that beneath his absolute ice is simply a dragging escapement. It's just a flaw in the machine.
All right, part three, the silent observers, specifically the loom of time.
An argument of this cosmic magnitude doesn't just happen in a vacuum, It is being recorded. And the evolution of this clockwork snow owl throughout the timeline is so telling. At first, Sir Brain just dismissed it as a sentimental contingency. But look at what actually happens.
Deep in its recursive memory coils, it starts archiving their collaborative dialogue. It begins recording the temperature of Brain's dark fire right alongside the cadence of Alara's honest pulse, and it weaves them together into this incredible loom of time. And then, it unilaterally projects schematics of a second space-time tear. The owl is no longer just a passive observer here. It's become an independent sentinel, monitoring a universe that is actively reacting to its maker's presence.
Which brings us to part 4, the temporal library, a vast metaphysical void. So this looming space-time fracture brings us to our next really important setting, the temporal library. The crucial thing to understand here is how this void operates. It doesn't run on standard clocks. The ordinary succession of hours is entirely replaced by the bizarre logic of unbound folios. It's this cold, patient, sentient archive that exists purely to catalog its visitors deterministically. And significantly, it has already refused the conversation with Sir Brain. It completely sealed that second space-time tear with deliberate precision just to keep his chaos out.
But watch how the library reacts to Alara. Step by step, it literally recoils from her humanity. It senses her honest pulse, and because the library inherently requires absolute ice to maintain its cold, patient narrative, it interprets her pulse as a foreign contamination. Consequently, the library actively refuses to archive the shared scar of her influence. It rejects anything that isn't purely, rigidly mechanical.
On to part 5, the synthesis, the sixth parable.
We've got the rigid thesis of the mechanical god, the flexible antithesis of the sovereign artisan, and now they crash head-on into the unyielding reality of our synthesis. The sixth parable is profound. It's about the single event that the temporal library could never, ever catalog or archive. The moment a system chooses to simply stop ticking. This is the ultimate limitation of mechanical sovereignty. It basically proves that a rhythm which never fails isn't actually a sign of eternal life. It is merely a precursor to a total, uncalculated grinding halt.
Which obviously raises the ultimate question. What actually happens when a mechanical god's rhythm finally fails? Sir Brain stubbornly believes his dark fire is the lightning that births its own sky. But the sixth parable reveals the hard truth. Even a god who claims to be the absolute only inhabitant of his spirit cannot override the world's eventual refusal to keep his time.
Part 6, the conclusion, the 12 o'clock crack. This brings us to the inevitable, shattering climax of this lonely escapement. How our two characters interpret this fracture really defines their entire conflict. To Sir Brain, the 12 o'clock crack is a noble destruction. He sees it as a deliberate choice made by a sovereign deity writing his signature across history. But Alara, she sees right through that. To her, this is just a mechanical failure. It's the collapse of a creature that was simply too frightened to ever face the silence.
I want to read Alara's final, devastating warning to him because it just hits the nail on the head. She says, "When the clock strikes 12, you will find that your 12 o'clock crack is not a signature written across history, but the sound of a seized axle finally shattering because it was too rigid to ever truly live." It's such a chilling summary of the fatal flaw of mechanical tyranny. Rigidity isn't strength, it is brittleness.
But for Alara, our sovereign artisan, this crack isn't a tragic ending at all. The fracture in the absolute ice opens a door that leads truly outward. It is the exact opening she needs to step away from the deterministic fate of the machine and walk freely into an unmeasured morning, armed with her honest pulse and her deliberate soft errors.
Which leaves us with a really powerful final thought to ponder today. When your own clock strikes 12, will you remain trapped in the rigid gears of a sublime prison of your own making? Or will you embrace your humanity, use your own soft errors, and step outward into an unmeasured morning? It's a fascinating look at perfection, rigidity, and the incredible freedom we can actually find in our flaws. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I absolutely can't wait to dive into the next topic with you.